Today's garden project will be putting in my tomatoes. I'm going to bring you out here and walk around with you as I do it, and maybe we can point out a couple of things that you hadn't thought of, or maybe I'm just repeating myself, or maybe this is the first time you ever planted tomatoes. So in that case, you'll want to follow me out here into the garden, and I'll show you what I know on this subject. Here in the Bay Area, it's early April. It's a good time to get the tomatoes in the ground. We still have some soil moisture available. There was rain within the last week here, so that's a pretty good time to start. I also have flowers on the apple trees, and there's blossoms in the cherries and blossoms in the citrus. So that's indicating it's ready for tomatoes. So the first thing I've done here is I've prepared a site for the tomatoes that's in full sun. I'm standing in it. As you can see, we got quite a shadow here today. Temperatures are going to start rising into the 80s here during the course of this next week, so we're getting some warm summer-like conditions. It'll be good for the tomatoes. Tomatoes are hardier than a lot of the summer vegetables we grow. So if you're thinking about planting things like watermelons, or if you're going to use the super sweet corns, or maybe if you were considering putting in eggplants, you're probably going to wait a while yet. The tomato can go out there almost 2 weeks ahead of watermelons and eggplants. Not all summer vegetables are created equal when it comes to their cold tolerance. Tomatoes a pretty tough character. It'll put up with cooler soil temperatures. Another way to tell whether it's time to plant tomatoes is if you'd had tomatoes in the garden in previous years, and if you see the seedlings coming up on their own, then that usually indicates the conditions are ready for the tomatoes. So you can go ahead and put your transplants in. So now that I have the spot selected out here, the next thing I want to do is go back into the greenhouse and go select some tomato plants. Here I am inside the greenhouse. I'm looking at my tomato selection. I got about 5 or 6 different varieties here. And they're everywhere from way there in the back. The tallest ones are just about 7 weeks old at this point. Right over here, I have some that are probably closer to about 3 weeks. The perfect tomato plant is somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks old. And I'd say the majority of my plants currently are about 6 weeks, so they're just about right. The 8-week-old plants in the back will bear an earlier crop than the younger plants, but the crop won't be as big. And so when you're selecting tomato plants, you really want to be looking for really nice small plants, something that's not overgrown. It shouldn't have any flowers on it. As you can see, all these are still green. Some of the earliest varieties have a little bit of bud development. A little bit of bud development's fine, but you don't want the plant in flower with fruit when you put it in the ground. It's just not going to help you out. You might get a couple of earlier tomatoes, but your total crop is going to suffer because of it. You need a younger, more vigorous, and precocious plant, not an old, loaded up, gnarly, woody thing that looks like a tree. So stay away from the great big overgrown tomato plants, and really don't pay extra for them to get that plant. What you really want are nice young plants. These 6-pack plants right here of aromas, these are beautiful. All right, this is really nice. Okay, these aromas are just about 4, maybe 4.5 weeks old. They are the perfect size. Now that I've selected my tomato plants, the next thing I want to do is I want to spread some organic fertilizer out here in the garden. Now this site has already been prepared by growing a crop of clover and winter rye on it. And so I'm not going to bother to use compost out here because I have basically already grown my own compost by using cover crops. But if you didn't use a cover crop in the garden last winter, then I highly recommend that you put down at least 1 inch or 2 of compost. Now that I've spread my fertilizer, my next step will be to take a regular garden rake and to incorporate my fertilizer into the site. Now some people just throw the fertilizer under the plant as they put it in. that will work, but remember, your tomato roots are going to spread over a very wide area as the plant grows. And so my suggestion to you is to spread the fertilizer over a wide area too, so it accommodates the roots of the plant as it develops. Alrighty, so I have gone through and I have dug my holes. I have saved the last hole for the rest of you. You'll notice my holes zigzag back and forth. That's because this is going to be a stereophonic row of tomatoes, and the tomatoes will be offset from one another. I can get a few more plants into the row by doing it this way. They're triangulated, and then I'll probably be able to drop some basil plants or maybe some carrot seeds or some compatible plant with tomatoes into the triangles between the tomatoes a little bit later on in the season here. So here I picked a spot, and I'm about 1.5 or 2 foot away from the last hole. Like I said, these holes are triangulated, and so I pushed my spade into the earth here and pull back on it like that. Now, first off, I'm going to go inside the hole. I'm going to dig it down about 1.5 shovels or almost 2 shovels deep here. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of double digging on this. I'm a lazy man. I don't pull all the soil out of the hole like John Jevons does. What I do, though, is this tool right here is called a Spading Fork. This is a nice one with the split hickory wood handle and so on, drop forged, and I'm going to push it down into the bottom of the hole like this, rock it back and forth, and then I'm going to pull back on it like that. So I'm creating cracks in the soil beneath the hole. And what this will do is it'll break up some of the compaction below, and it's going to open the earth up a little bit with fracture lines so that the tomato roots are going to find it easier to get down into the earth. Okay, so I've done that with all the previous holes, but I saved one here for you so you can watch me do Bill's version of double digging. If you got it right, things will start to lift up pretty nice and it won't be too tough to do. There we go. Well, I've selected my flat of tomatoes right here. And now, not all tomatoes are created equal. And so what I'm planning to do here is I was going to go ahead and take all the tallest growing types. Those are the ones called indeterminate on the tag when you buy them, or on the seed package when you're planting your seed. So I'm going to take all the tall ones, I'm going to put them on the northeast end of this row, and then I'm going to take all the short ones and I'm going to put them over on the southern and western end of the row. That way, as the shadow comes through the day, the shorter tomatoes will get the benefit of the sunlight rather than getting the shade of the taller plants. So we're starting on this end with tall ones and ending up with short ones over on that end. So one of the tallest tomatoes that I've got here in the bunch today is the Burpee's Big Boy. Okay, so I got a Burpee's Big Boy right here. Now you'll see a lot of times people will dig these really deep holes and then bury the stems halfway up. Now that's a practice that can be engaged in, but I have a problem with it, especially here in the Bay Area. In our area, the soils are still quite cool. At a depth, I can feel a little bit of winter's cold in this soil yet. If I go burying this tomato all the way up to, say, here, what's going to happen is the poor root system is going to be sitting down there in this just terrible cold condition. And so that's not going to be a real good idea for it. I'm going to bury it about up to the first seed leaves over here. So it's going to go in a little deeper than it grew originally. But in general, I do not bury my tomatoes deep if I'm planting early in the year. Now, as I start planting later and later in the year, then I start pushing the tomatoes deeper and deeper in the ground. Hopefully, I won't be doing a lot of tomato planting late this year, because I'm afraid we'll probably have run out of water if I do that. So we're starting early here. The roots will dig down. I've spaded that soil nice and deep. And now I'm taking the extra earth that I had from this, and I am circling the tomato with it. So I'm creating a depression here that's going to catch a certain amount of water. That way, when I'm irrigating, I can focus the water right at the original root ball. And I'll stick a tag right in there like that. Okay. I am not going to plant these all the way down these stems like you see done in some of the magazines and some of the other videos, because it's cold down there, man.
And if I put this poor thing into that depth, they're going to sit there and just languish going, Bill, I hate you. Bill, why did you plant me so deep? Oh my God, I'm freezing. You think I'm an Eskimo? I'm a tomato. Yeah, you know, it's like have a little courtesy with your vegetables. They do have temperature requirements. This is relatively early in the year, and so if we plant these things, you know, way up to like here, you know, they're just going to shiver. They just shiver, and it isn't going to do any good. If you got a really overlong stem because you were growing them in the house without enough light or something, you might want to consider laying the stem sideways and burying it rather than planting it all the way to China. So for the next trick, I'm going to put in 3 Romas. These are the classic Italian tomato used for sauces and cooking. These are great. They're one of the staples of the tomato industry here in California. They grow really well out here. They're very good for when you're trying to make a sauce, or if you're trying to make a salsa even, where it might be uncooked, because it's low in moisture. And being low in moisture, your product won't be soupy. If you're going to cook it down into tomato sauce, for instance, for spaghetti or something, well, then what's going to happen to you is you're going to use less carbon, the lower carbon footprint on the planet, because you won't use as much energy to be able to reduce the sauce. So I highly recommend anybody who cooks that you use Italian tomatoes. 2 of the favorites are Roma, also San Marzano is an excellent one.
Now that we have all the tomatoes in place in the garden, the next thing we got to do about it is give them some support. The time to get the tomato cages on is at the same time that you're planting your tomatoes, is my opinion of this subject. Is often what happens is people start trying to put them on later, and then they don't get around to it fast enough, and the tomatoes get oversized, and then it's hell to get these things in place. And so we're going to go ahead and work on getting them in spot here right now. First off, you want to make sure that you got them tapped down pretty good. The soil's been loosened up a bit over here by tilling, and so these are going to go ahead and work their way back up if we don't get them hammered down. You really can't put a tomato cage in without staking it, because if you don't stake your tomato cage, then it's going to go blowing over on you. And so put 1 or 2 stakes in the cage, and then tie the cage down to the stakes with a shoelace or a piece of wire or some such thing. I usually also drive the stake through the wire of the cage, like that right there. Okay, come on the inside and then went to the outside. Make sure you get the stake driven in pretty deep. So I'm over here on the short end of the row right now. I'm working with the Romas, and as I said, Romas are determinate tomatoes, which means that they'll grow out just so far before they stop making vines and set fruit. Okay, so a Roma will not be as large as the Better Boys on the other end of the row over there. Well, we got all the cages in place, stakes are pounded in. We're pretty much done with the whole tomato garden thing here. At this point, we need to water our plants in. Even though the soil here is moist from recent rains, we still need to settle this soil down because I've got a lot of air in it, and the roots will dry out if we don't bring the soil back down. Fluffy's good, but then you gotta compact again. And if you recall, I left some basins around our tomato plants here. You see, I'm filling them up. This works well. It'll focus your watering for you. It's not much to it. This is really all it takes to get tomatoes into the ground. Key points are: find a place in full sun, make sure you put in some fertilizer and some compost, or work in a cover crop. Know the varieties you're working with. That helps. At first you may have to experiment. Eventually you'll find some tomato types that you like and work really well for you in your environment. We're not all the same as far as that's concerned. So everybody has their perfect plant. when it comes to tomatoes. Consider planting more than one plant to begin with. The old gardener told me, one for the bugs, one for the weather, one for the gardener. So always put in more plants than you're really going to need. You can share excess if it comes, but if you end up with a crop failure because you put all your eggs or tomatoes in one basket, you may be sorry you did it that way. Also, by using indeterminate types, which tend to be long season and continue bearing well into the year, especially if they're very disease resistant, you'll be able to have real late crops. But if you put in early types, you'll be able to pick fruit maybe a month or two earlier than some of the later ones. If you have stuff that's intermediate there in the center, that's going to help out. So first you get the early, then the mid, then eventually the late will carry on. So your garden spreads itself out a little bit. That's, I think, a key point. Use some different maturity dates on the tomatoes. Take a look at what variety of tomato you're raising as to what your usage is going to be. If you want to sun dry them, nothing better than cherries. I love sun-dried cherry tomatoes. The commercial guys, they use Italian tomatoes to sun dry. They're fine. They work well. They're low in moisture. They dry easy. They're pretty sour for that. The cherry is sweet and really delicious when it's dried like a raisin. If you're going to cook, again, use dried tomatoes, tomatoes that don't have a whole lot of moisture in them. If the only thing you ever do with a tomato is to slice it up into a salad or put a slice on a sandwich, well, then you're going to want the slicer types that are wetter, usually larger. So tailor the variety of tomatoes that you're putting out there to your climate, to the season, and to your needs, how you're going to use them. All right? Enjoy your tomato garden this summer. It's America's favorite vegetable. It's real simple. Great place to get started gardening if you haven't ever done this before. Thanks a lot for watching. Enjoy.